Good evening, Houdat Nation, and a special good evening and happy Wednesday evening to our Bayou Blitz family. Brendan Boylan and myself would like to thank you for tuning in on our, what is this, our 10th broadcast of the Bayou, our 10th episode of the Bayou Blitz 2022. I am Bob Rose. I am your less attractive, less intelligent, less youthful duo of your Bayou Blitz hosts. And joining me, of course, from it looks like home finally, Mr. Brendan Boylan. How are you tonight, Brendan?
Good. It's good to be home. World Tour took a pause for a little bit. I know I'll be out some other places in October, but it's nice to be home. Got to redecorate back here a little bit. My alma mater got a new logo, so I had to pick up some new stuff. And always good to be back at the house. I know you had a nice trip out to New Orleans. You're home now as well. And we got plenty to talk about for this week because, well, not just the scoreboard. There was a lot that happened. And for some of you that experienced some problems with DirecTV, I'm sure that you missed some of it because Sunday Ticket was atrocious for lots and lots of people, per usual, early in the season. And I was out of town, so of course, I had to use it as well, and I had those troubles as well. But Bob, let's start with this. I think the easy thing is to point the fingers at everything before the matchup. All the headlines: Saints 7-0 over the last 7 against Tampa Bay. Brady's never beat the Saints in the regular season since coming to Tampa Bay, and has historically, even when he was in New England, had troubles against New Orleans. You could see that the Saints defense, despite the lack of pass rush, was getting in Brady's head. Guys, I don't even know if it was a legitimate bet, but if you didn't bet the over on half of a broken tablet by Tom Brady last week, you lost some easy money. You had a broken tablet. You had plenty of words that we will not repeat because this is a family show.
If I'm not allowed to say them, we're certainly not allowed to say that Tom Brady said them. I'm better than Tom Brady. There, I said it.
Oh man, I know this is going to be a good one because Bob and his love for Tom Brady is going to go a long way tonight. But outside of all the headlines, let's talk about the one thing that wasn't the game that made the national headline. And let's just go ahead and get it out of the way. And all you guys in the comments, you can leave your thoughts, your emotions, what have you. I will go ahead and share that, and I think we all know the moment I'm talking about. Mike Evans coming in and knocking out Marshawn Latimore and both players getting ejected. I can say from the chat that you, myself, Kyle, and John have, we were all very surprised that Latimore was ejected from the game. Now, we know the rivalry these two have.
Mm-hmm.
We know that Mike Evans is a quote-unquote repeat offender, if you will. But Bob, a guy who was being owned, for lack of a better term, in the matchup, yet again, 1 catch for 7 yards when guarded and covered by Latimore. Tight ball game, frustration on the Tampa sideline. To come out and do that, I think there are certain words and adjectives for someone who would do that. You're a little bit of a punk, right? If you're getting beat one-on-one, opposed to going out there and trying to beat the guy that's beating you and try to get the better of him, you just go out and you knock the guy out. And then have the audacity after the game to say Latimore was too emotional in the matchup. There's a lot of things that don't add up there, and I can understand why a lot of Saints fans are saying, "Well, this is the new rivalry." Well, yeah, this is the modern day Saints rivalry for a couple. Well, they're really this is going to be the last year, I think, after Brady's gone. It changes a lot. I can understand the frustrations in the team's play, but more than anything, I can understand the frustrations of just feeling like yet again the officials are against you. And especially in this one where Latimore gets, in my opinion, wrongfully tossed from the game. You have the ghost penalties on the drive that allows Tampa Bay to score and take the lead. And Bob, I know you were in the dome and you were doing your thing, so I'll just share with you what Greg Olson, longtime NFC South foe of the Saints, said in the booth. He said, "What do you expect him to do? How are you supposed to coach a better tackle than, in this case, referencing Bradley Roby's hit?
Mm-hmm.
How are you supposed to coach it any better?" And this is coming from a guy that played not in the league 20 years ago, not in the league 10 years ago, but played in the league just a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
He understands how the game's going to be played. There were a lot of issues on the field, but man, and you can tell me how it felt inside the Superdome, but it certainly felt as if the Saints had to also go up against things out of their control.
Brandon, I don't know where to start. You know what? I will start with the officiating because Greg Olson couldn't say it, but yeah, many NFL fans know it. Many NFL players know it. When you go up against a Tom Brady or you go up against an Aaron Rodgers, or it's really starting to get to that point when you go up against a Patrick Mahomes. But it's been this way with Tom Brady for 2 decades. You're not just playing Tom Brady. You're not just playing Tom Brady's team. You are playing Roger Goodell and his officials that are hired specifically to protect and to boost the performance of said Tom Brady, said Aaron Rodgers, said whatever else, whatever other player you feel is in that category. And it's as simple as that. I have never seen a more gifted touchdown drive, gifted from officials, gifted touchdown drive in the history of me watching professional, college, or high school football. It was downright atrocious. In my opinion, NFL officials, when they do this for the Bradys or the Goodell's protected teams or players, it's so blatantly obvious that it should be insulting to anyone with a reasonable sense of intelligence. And it's one of the reasons why I'm always hesitant to watch a Tom Brady game, or I'm always hesitant to watch an Aaron Rodgers game, because I know, and it's not just the New Orleans Saints. I know the Saints have been on the brown end of Goodell's stick many times. But it's any team that plays these protected teams or protected players, and it's sickening. Having said that, the officials are not the reason why the New Orleans Saints lost this game. They performed the kill shot, or at least one of the handful of kill shots. But the Saints were outplayed, down the stretch, and then when they fell apart, New Orleans did. They lost composure in every way possible. The wheels literally fell off, and it didn't start with the fight. That was another kill shot. To me, it started with Dennis Allen passing up the opportunity to run Will Lutz out there for a 57, 58-yard field goal attempt to end the half. It was even with a kicker of Will Lutz's abilities and range, that's by no means a given. So I'm not chalking up an automatic 3 points on the board. But you let the clock tick down to 28 seconds, and you could have called a timeout instead of taking the delay of game penalty. Your defense was really putting the screws to Tom Brady and the entire Tampa Bay offense. So if you're Coach Dennis Allen, you have to have confidence that defense is going to continue. I mean, hell, you're a defensive coach. You take the chance. You run Lutz out there, knowing that if he hits it, you now have a 6-0 lead going into the locker room, where points are at a premium, because this was a very, very intense physical defensive game. At worst, Lutz misses it, and you show confidence in your defense that you're going to stop Tom Brady, Leonard Fournette, Mike Evans from getting the 20, 25 yards in 28 seconds that it would have been necessary for their own long field goal attempt. To me, that's coaching without a backbone, and that's when the wheels started to come off, and then the Latimore fight. Let me tell you from my perspective. Because I know TV shows a different perspective, and you guys could actually probably educate me on it. I haven't brought myself to watch the film on it after the fact. Yeah, the people in the stadium could give the TV viewers a different perspective, as could the TV viewers give the vice versa. I was actually waiting for Marshawn Latimore to get an unsportsmanlike or taunting penalty, because the view that I had, he was jawing it up with first Brady, who instigated everything, but let's not going to pretend that Tom Brady is going to get ejected or even a 15-yard penalty for anything. So let's take that off the table right now. Latimore started jawing back with Brady, and then it really was getting into it with the entire Tampa Bay sideline. So that's why I was waiting for that flag. And then Leonard Fournette. First, let me get this out of the way too. Mike Evans, Leonard Fournette, Devin White. They are cowardly, cheap shot artist thugs on a Tampa Bay team full of them. And we saw 2 of the 3 in action on that specific, I'm not going to say play, that specific confrontation. When Leonard Fournette jacked up Latimore, Fournette should have been ejected too. Zero question about it. But I'm not going to say that Latimore shouldn't have been ejected. And the reason is this. Officials will always get the guy who retaliates. That's a given, and everybody knows it. Now, my immediate thought was Latimore needs to show more composure. And I still sort of believe that. But the reality is this. Brendan, you, me, any of you viewers tuning in a real life situation, are you going to let someone jack you in the neck or the jaw and turn around and walk away? Probably not. Never. So even though Latimore, I think, needs to show better composure, I'm not going to fault him for it either. And then when Latimore and Fournette then got into it, it wasn't too late for the officials to step in, remove everybody from the situation. Give a couple of personal foul or unnecessary, unsportsmanlike penalties, and then hope that things level out. It then escalated when Bruce Arians, who was not supposed to be on the sidelines in the first effing place, has no official capacity with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers coaching organization. Yes, coaching staff. No. He sent Mike Evans out there like the brainless watchdog that he is, to surprise, jack up Marshawn Latimore in the back, because God forbid Mike Evans squares up with you, face to face. Not his style. Evans obviously was going to get ejected for that, so the officials were right in that. The NFL was wrong, because Evans should have been suspended for a minimum of 3 games. Again, look who he plays for. So I'm going to take that off the table too. When the bench clearing brawl happened, it didn't. Evans was rightfully thrown out. Fournette should have been thrown out. The quarterback should have been too, but again, wasn't in a matter of the equation. And Latimore, whether we believe it rightly or wrongly, the retaliation strike is always going to get thrown out too. Now, idiots on social media have actually argued with each other. I've tried to stay out of it, but actually argue with each other. Oh, Tampa Bay lost just as much as the Saints did because Evans was their best receiver. If you honestly think that, and you're not wearing Tampa Bay colors, then you don't know football. You're taking one of, if not the best cover corner in the National Football League in Marshawn Latimore out of the equation. And Tom Brady, 1 series later, threw a touchdown pass over P.J. Williams. P.J. Williams was playing cornerback, specifically the cornerback position that Marshawn Latimore would have been playing. Marshawn Latimore would not have given up that touchdown pass, because Marshawn Latimore would have looked back, unlike P.J. Williams did, and made the interception and maybe turned the momentum. So, the wheels started to really fall off in rapid succession right after that fight, because Dennis Allen, here I am coming back to coaching. Dennis Allen, that coaching staff and those locker room leaders for New Orleans did an awful job of reining in the intensity that the New Orleans Saints, that the entire team was rightfully feeling. But that's when coaches and leaders have to level out everything. Calm down, guy. We could still beat them and beat the hell out of them and point up at that scoreboard right afterward, because the game was still well in the Saints' hand until then. Momentum momentum and psychosis totally flipped hands at that point. And the Saints at that point were outplayed because they lost composure.
I think it's interesting what you said about Arians, and I'll just throw this out there real quick for those who don't know. The NFL is investigating why he was on the sideline. It later came out per documentation on seat assignments within the press box that the initial report that they were not given seats within the press box was false. That Arians did have an assigned place within the press box. So little interesting. We'll see how that develops. I'm in agreement with Bob with the Evans suspension. I figured it would be longer. And if anything, when it first came out, I figured because you have Evans, who's a repeat offender, and you have Marshawn Latimore, and the history between those two is very known, I figured that both would be suspended, with Latimore getting a game and Evans getting 2 or 3. So when it was just Evans, little surprised. When it was just Evans for 1 game, more surprised. However, it doesn't directly affect New Orleans moving forward. So, you got to kind of wipe your hands of it and call it a day. What's going to be really interesting is when these two match up in Tampa Bay later this year. That's definitely going to be a date that everybody has circled. Just because of not just because of how it's been the last few years, but you kind of hit a climax on Sunday. And and at least I got the feeling, Bob. I don't know about you being there, but I got the feeling that these two teams could meet not just one more time this year, but 2 more times this year. And that no matter how it goes, Brady's going to get his last shot against New Orleans in the playoffs. And that's just kind of the vibes that I was getting as the game played out, even before the fight, because it was a tight game. We both predicted on Sunday morning that it was going to be a really defensive game. And shoot, it was 3-3 until 7 minutes and some change into the fourth quarter. And it tells you everything you need to know. Both these defenses are elite defenses. So with that, let's talk about the game itself, not the game within the game. We'll talk about the game itself, and we'll start here because this is what the guys that and all you wonderful people that continue to break our record, if you will, for votes on Twitter every week. Another week where we surpassed the previous week's votes on what we should talk about. You guys want to hear how the offense should definitely improve, right? Because we've only seen one really good quarter of Saints offensive football this season, which is a shock because, look at what the Saints have done for the last decade and a half. But before we get to that, let's see what Gypsy's got. It's just me, would you agree that the cornerback bumps before the ball came out in the deep stretch a number of times? There was bump and run coverage down the field on just about every Olave deep ball. Carlton Davis, like him or not, really good corner in this league. And when you have a veteran corner and a good corner in this league going against a rookie wideout, I'm going to take the veteran Pro Bowl level defensive back just about every time to come up with something to throw him off. And when it comes to Olave's fumble late in the game, I felt really bad for him because that finally felt like the moment where, okay, Olave gets the 5th. And honestly, he should have scored. He kind of was a little too fast for himself. Turf monster got him, whatever you want to say. But the fact that he made this big play, the energy was going to shift. If the Saints score a touchdown, it's a 3-point game. And he did everything right but control it at the end.
Yeah.
I felt bad for him more than I was upset, if you will. If I'm a coach on the sideline, you're upset that you just that was it. But if anything, you kind of had to feel for the kid. And remember, this guy's 21, 22 years old and is still learning. And that's why last week when we talked about fantasy guys, and I brought up Jarvis Landry, said, I think Jarvis Landry's the safer bet down the stretch right now. There's going to be a point where it flips and Olave is really going to become a number 2 target for New Orleans. But for now, that's why Jarvis Landry's in New Orleans.
Yeah.
He's a mentor. He's a bridge number 2 receiver. but he's going to be a really quality number 3 receiver as well. But back to the offensive struggles. Where do we start? Let's start at the obvious, Bob. Not having Alvin Kamara hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And we both expected some aggressive running in between the tackles. And let's say probably Mark Ingram's first 5, maybe 5 touches. I sat there and, okay, Ingram's running angry. He's running hard, right? It might have not been pretty. It might have, but it was a hard 3 yards. You know, he had a couple that he broke for, 7+. But even those 2 or 3, okay, Ingram's running hard. This is Ingram of 17, 18, even 19 with Baltimore. And then it just kind of stopped. Energy wasn't as much there. The offensive line, they had moments where they didn't look good at all. But on the same hand, there were moments where Jameis was caught between 2 minds, is more the soccer term, but he was caught in 2 minds. And the one that sticks out is the 3rd down where he rolled out. He could have easily walked for a first down, but he thought, I'm going to throw it. I'm going to throw it. It gets stripped. James Hurst recovers for New Orleans, and it's not a turnover. But it was moments like that continuously throughout the game where it seemed like he was thinking too much. Now, with that said, I don't think the back injury, which is incredible that he's even playing with 4 fractured vertebrae, but I don't think that had as much to do with the poor performance as Jameis being in his own head had to do with the performance. I'm saying it affected him, and it will affect him. And again, guys got guts to play. But you could see, kind of like you were saying, Bob, composure might be the good word. Jameis's composure just kept doing this.
Yep.
And those late interceptions, Tampa fans will come and tell New Orleans fans, Tampa writers, Tampa reporters will tell you, oh, it's the Jameis we've known. Yes, it is. But this is the first time New Orleans has seen that Jameis.
Yeah.
And it just happened to come at this point. And that's his fault. And one of the things I've learned over the years, Bob, there's good in everybody, there's bad in everybody. And for most people, they try to cover the bad and maybe like hide it under like a metaphorical wing, right? But every now and again, the wing flaps up and you can see the bad in somebody, right? And in this
you saying bald people are bad?
What?
Are you saying bald people are bad?
No, I'm saying a wing, like a bird.
Oh, I thought you said wig.
No, a wing. I'm sorry. Here, let me get it back in the camera. Like a wing.
I like my metaphor better, but okay.
Okay, sure. Well, we'll meet in the middle. Wiggin. Sure. But I think every now and again that flares up a little bit, and out of defense or out of whatever, and you can see whatever they're trying to hide underneath that metaphorical wing. Make sure I enunciate a little bit. And I think that's Jameis. Jameis.
Breaking news, Bayou Blitz fans. Brendan Boylan thinks bald people are evil.
Oh God, I can't wait for my Twitter mentions after this. But I think Jameis, you see all the great things. You see the strong arm. You see all the things that made him the number 1 pick. See all the things that made him a Pro Bowler. But that lack of composure, that's what's that underneath the wing that he's trying to hide. And it just happened to come out in a game where the Saints really needed some things to happen quick, late, and he forced it. And he didn't look great, but there were definitely moments where he didn't look bad. I think the bigger concern that I have, Bob, and again, you being there, Olave was targeted like 13 or 14 times in the game and only caught 4 or 5 passes. I don't have the numbers right in front of me. That is where concern lies, because even in the first 3 quarters against Atlanta in week 1, the chemistry, the timing between Jameis and receivers outside of Jarvis Landry wasn't really good. And we saw more of it in week 2. What could you see from a bird eyes view inside the dome?
I saw Jameis missing a lot of receivers underneath. Yeah, because I don't know whether the game plan. Well, no, I do believe that the game plan coming in, was for Jameis to test the Buccaneers secondary deep with Olave. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that that was part of the game plan because that's what they did throughout the game. I don't have a problem with that strategy early on because I think it actually worked. It did back off Buccaneers coverage a little bit. It did prevent Tampa Bay from dropping an extra defender down in the box, which allowed the New Orleans to have, I know they had more yardage on the ground against Atlanta, but it never felt like the Saints running game got on track against the Falcons. It did feel like they ran the ball with some success against the Buccaneers on Sunday. They certainly had a hell of a lot more success on the ground than Tampa Bay had running the ball against New Orleans. Like you said, Ingram was effective early on that potential touchdown drive, a definite scoring drive where Ingram fumbled the ball. Tony Jones and Dwayne Washington both had some really impressive runs. So the Saints were at least keeping the Buccaneers defense honest with the running game, which when you're without Alvin Kamara, and you're playing one of the elite defenses in the NFL, and both of these teams have elite defenses, like you said, keeping that defense honest with the running game is really the best you can ask for. But back to Olave, I don't have a problem with the deep shots early on because even though they weren't complete, they were still moderately successful because of the reasons that I just mentioned. As the game went along, you talked about Jameis holding on to the football too long, which we saw again. You saw Jameis passing up opportunities to pick up a gain or a first down with his legs by holding on to the ball too long and trying to make a play with his arm. We saw that again. I still see a Jameis that's terrified to make mistakes, and it's become a paralysis by analysis situation with him. And what I saw more and more as the game progressed, the game plan of the coaches or even Jameis being Jameis or all of the above was ingrained in his head. I have to make a play down the field. I have to make a play down the field. Well, I could think of 4 occasions just off the top of my head. Two of them to Michael Thomas, one to Tony Jones, and then another, I think it was Jawan Johnson, but it was another intermediate pass that would have been an easy completion for 8, 10, 12 yards. But instead, Jameis is trying to make the big play down the field. Again, that's on Jameis. It is. That's the Jameis that we have been worried about morphing from his Tampa Bay days. But it's also, I come back to the coaches. You got to be on the sidelines if you're Pete Carmichael or even Dennis Allen. Hey, Jameis, we don't need all this back in one play. You be patient. You take what the defense gives you. If there's one thing that we know about Jameis Winston, it's that he's an emotional guy. It's up to those coaches to keep those emotions in check and leveled out because it's partly those emotions and just wanting to do so much because he is a competitor, wanting to do so much that causing him to make these mistakes. And like Kyle Mosley just chimed in the press conference, and Kyle Mosley and our John Hendricks were both there. Jameis was hurting after the game, and Brendan and I will get into the injury situation in a little bit. He has to be applauded for playing through the pain. There's no doubt about it. But again, that competitor, he just wants to make a play, and I saw him passing up much easier gains that the Tampa Bay defense was getting. Michael Thomas was absolutely shredding Buccaneers coverage all day long. I think he had 5 or 6 catches for 60-something yards again. He could have had double. He could have had double that, both in catches and yardage. But again, Jameis trying to make a play down the field. I don't fault him for that, but both him, within himself, and the coaches have to get back ingrained inside his head. You have receivers underneath. Olave is a big play waiting to happen, but you have Michael Thomas. You have Jarvis Landry. You need to feed these guys the ball more if that's what the defense is giving them. If you do, then the coverage is going to shift towards them, and then you have your Olave play or Deontay Hardy play over the top. So it was just it's a schematic error and a failure to make adjustments by both Jameis Winston and the Saints coaching staff as the game went along. Pass protection, and I know a lot of people, and John Hendricks and I talked about this after the game. Yeah, the Saints offensive line played better, much better against in run blocking. They still have loads of scheme problems in pass protection, and that terrifies the hell out of me. I don't care whether it's a healthy Jameis Winston, a beat-up Jameis Winston, or a healthy Andy Dalton back there. If you can't protect, we're going to see a lot of these games. Jameis Winston's been sacked 10 times and hit 17 times in these first 2 ball games. That's where your problem starts, ladies and gentlemen. It's not with Jameis Winston. It's up front.
Well, I saw a comment earlier, and I'm not sure if I'm able to scroll fast enough to find it, but just saying that the Saints' offensive line has done a terrible job picking up the blitz through 2 games.
Interior especially. Abysmal.
It's been bad. It has been bad, which gets me to this comment from our friend Sean. Hate to be that guy, but Taysom needs to be more involved as an offensive weapon, even if he takes snaps away from Jameis at quarterback. Now, Sean, if I'm correct, before we answer that question, I just have to throw this out here, Sean. I believe you were the guy who said that he picked up Taysom Hill as a tight end in fantasy last week, and I warned you that he only had 5. He only had 5 touches against Atlanta. I don't mean to pat myself on the back, but that is still where I think the Saints are with Taysom Hill. So this is more getting into the next conversation than anything. I still think the Taysom Hill, and it's not even think, I know the Sean Payton, Taysom Hill, whatever that was all Sean, right? Trying to almost force Taysom's way into the offense over the years.
Mm-hmm.
At points that didn't make much sense. I mean, how many times, Bob, in Drew Brees' final year, despite Drew's injuries, was it 3rd and 3, and you take one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time off the field for Taysom Hill? All right, that's all we need to say about that. I don't know if we will ever see Taysom Hill used in the same offensive capacity that he was under Sean Payton. With that said, Sean, I agree with you. I do think, especially when there's injuries to Jameis, that Taysom needs to be used more in the offense. And there's our weekly guest star. It's Will.
Say night-night, Bayou Blitz.
But I think that's where we are with Taysom Hill. And I'm in agreement. I think there's got to be ways to utilize him more. And a guy that we both talked about in the pregame show on Sunday that has been really silent over the last 2 weeks in terms of the offense is Deontay Hardy. How do you get a guy like that who can be an electrifying weapon involved as well in different ways? I mentioned especially with Kamara missing last week, do we see Hardy come out of the backfield a little bit, used more like a Deebo Samuel? Not all the time, but just to throw a little spice into the recipe, if you will. Those are some ways I think the offense can improve to answer the question that you guys wanted us to talk about. The biggest thing is the offensive line. Bob, I completely agree with the point. I think the offense, at least it felt more as if they were establishing the run against Tampa Bay and had their moments, and Ingram had his moments. And I think if Kamara goes against Carolina, we'll see a little bit more of that. And that should help the offensive line. It takes some pressure off of them. It takes some pressure off of Jameis. I think it starts with the offensive line. I think it starts with that, Jameis's decision-making, and just time. You know, the one thing I'll say about this game against Tampa Bay is, yes, the Saints offense looked bad, but the Saints defense looked good.
Mm-hmm. With one exception, but yeah.
One exception. And it's not like the Saints came out and played a terrible game against a terrible team.
No.
You know, whether Saints fans want to admit this to themselves or not, I know Bob and I have already gone through this process because we didn't know if Brady was playing this year or not. But Tampa's going to be a team that contends for the NFC. It's going to be the Green Bays. It's going to be Tampa. It's going to be New Orleans. Those are going to be your teams towards the top tier. Well, at least New Orleans has the potential to go that way. We need to see a lot more out of the offense. But when you go and you are tied with 7 minutes left in the game against a team that won the Super Bowl not that long ago, is going to contend for the NFC year in, year out. I don't want to pat the Saints on the back for a loss, right? I don't want the consolation prize, right? But at the end of the day, is there a little bit of overreaction from people? Yes. Is there a lot of emotion because of the events that happened in the game? Of course. But again, the Saints played defensively a very good game against an NFC contender. And the offense, if it wasn't, and we haven't even talked about the Mark Ingram fumble inside the 10, if the Saints score there, it's a completely different game.
Absolutely.
Even if it's 3 points, it's a completely different game at that point. So with those reasons, am I concerned about the Saints offense? Yes. Should we all be? Yes. But I think that the reactions of, oh, Jameis Winston, it's got to be Andy Dalton and this and that. Okay, guys. And yes, Scoob, I see your comment. No participation trophies. It's not a participation trophy. It's a let's have a come to Jesus. Let's realize that this Saints team's not that bad. And Bob and I talked about this maybe episode 7, episode 8. Bob might have a better memory than me, even though we talked about the first couple weeks of maybe the first 4 weeks of the regular season is almost an extension of the preseason. Yep. And that's what we're seeing with New Orleans. Now, if these problems are still there in the game in London and the game against Seattle, then you're a little bit more concerned. But for right now, you realize this is a team that's still finding chemistry. We talked about it throughout the offseason. This is almost a brand new offense compared to last year in terms of weapons. Your top 3 receivers didn't play last year. Jameis missed more than half the season last year. Playing with a new left tackle. There's a lot of things that still have to work themselves out. So personally, as an analyst and a writer and somebody who covers the team, I'm not too worried right now. There are reasons. There's flags. There's red flags. Mm-hmm. But those red flags can go away really quick. I'm not that concerned. Am I crazy, Bob?
Yeah, but not for that reason. I'm going to borrow. I'm going to borrow a saying Kyle Mosley, used way back in 2016. I think when you and I were doing regular radio shows with him. Saints fans, there's no reason to form a line on the Crescent City connection. This is no reason to panic. Now, I will acknowledge that this Sunday is a big game and a big opportunity against the Carolina Panthers, because if they lose, then you're looking at starting the year at 1-2 in the division. Not to mention 1-2 in a conference with another conference game against Minnesota coming up. So you do put yourself in an early hole. But I will agree that there are red flags. I'm not panicking. There's some things that I'm concerned about. There's certainly some things that irritate me about this team. One of them being the interior line, especially Andrus Pete, and especially the human turnstile known as Cesar Ruiz. If that interior line doesn't start picking up the blitz and the extra rushers that teams have been bringing and will now sure as hell be bringing more of at those guys. Again, like I said, it doesn't matter whether you've got Joe Montana, John Elway, Dan Marino at quarterback. They don't stand a chance. So you have to figure out a way to get that offensive line to perform better as pass blockers. They're coming along as run blockers, as we all saw. But their inability to pick up those inside gap rushers it makes the passing game almost useless because the team is just unable to establish what they want to do offensively. Do they want to be a physical smash mouth team? Do they want to be an air it out team? Do they want to be a team that's balanced right down the center? You can't establish that balance until you establish control of the line of scrimmage. And that's the major issue I see with New Orleans offensively right now. Defensively, they played a lot closer to the style of defense that we thought that they were, and that we know that they're capable of against Tampa Bay. But the one thing that concerns me is still the ability to rush the passer. We have not seen that in 2 weeks. And no, I'm not talking. People have come at me saying, "Oh yeah, the pass rush isn't the problem." They were playing off coverage. Brady was getting rid of the ball quick. They were moving Mariota around. I'm not talking about sacks. Sacks are nice, sure. I'm talking about the ability to disrupt the timing of the opposing offense. And while we saw New Orleans do that with Brady, it was more from a coverage aspect. It wasn't their ability, and I'm not talking about blitzing or not blitzing either. New Orleans has shown us with this exact personnel the ability to get to the quarterback, disrupt the quarterback, create turnovers, cause sacks with just their front four, and they're not doing that so far. That's something that needs to change really, really quick. I know we were focused on the offense, but I had to mention that about the defense. So really, in a nutshell, other than Jameis Winston and Alvin Kamara's health, my problems with this team lie on the line. They lied on the line of scrimmage after week 1. And after week 2, not much has changed, ladies and gentlemen. This line, the both defense and offensive lines need to come together for this team to do much of anything. And since we're focused on the offense currently, again, I say you can't establish anything offensively till you take control of that line of scrimmage.
You got to win the trenches. And I think that is easily said about the defense too. If you're not winning in the trenches, you're not making the life of the linebackers easy. You're not making the life of your DBs easy either. Just to further Bob's point, Davenport and Jordan have combined for 1 quarterback hit through 2 games. We're not talking sacks, we're talking about pressure. And 1. That's a little bit of an issue. Now, Bob, you kind of brought it up. Atlanta did move Mariota around well enough to avoid a lot of it. And Brady was getting the ball out in like 2.5 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what a veteran quarterback does. And for Mariota, do I give the Saints a little bit of a hall pass? Maybe. We had no idea what kind of offense Atlanta was going to run.
Right.
And they came out and they played one that suited Marcus Mariota really well. Now, when you play a team like Carolina, we'll shift into week 3 now, and you play a guy like Baker Mayfield, who has some similarities to Mariota. I think overall a better quarterback than Mariota. How are you going to adjust to that? And you have 2 weeks of game film of it too. How are you going to adjust to make sure you disrupt Baker Mayfield? Because the Panthers have had their moments offensively with Baker, and they've had some moments where, and I can tell you this, being in Charlotte and being a member of the media in different aspects in Charlotte, after week 1, people were calling for Baker Mayfield's head. Overreaction? Yes. But did they have some valid points because of pass protection? Did they have some valid points because of the inability to be accurate with the football? One guy here locally with Fox, or previously with Fox, I'm not sure where he went now, actually said via Twitter, and I believe on the radio as well, you cannot tell me that Cam Newton wouldn't have been just as good in that game because of what was surrounding Baker Mayfield. With that said, that should tell you that the Panthers have their own issues up front. Christian McCaffrey, as talented of a back as he is not going to fix every problem they have offensively. And I know a lot of people were hoping for that in Carolina because he missed a lot of time, and he has missed a lot of time. But it's not the answer. And Baker, as talented as I think Baker Mayfield is, and I don't think he's a Hall of Fame type of quarterback, but I think he's a quarterback that can win you games and has proven to win playoff games with arguably the worst franchise in NFL history. right? Got to the playoffs with the Cleveland Browns. I think that's an accomplishment in itself. You know, he can't be the answer if you don't surround him with pieces. And I think this is a really good opportunity for the Saints defensive line to get after it, get right. Baker leads the league in interceptions over the last 3 or 4 years. Him and Sam Darnold are 1 and 2. Ironically, they're on the same team. This is a really good opportunity for the New Orleans defense, who has played well, but gives them the opportunity to get right and take the ball away. Something they haven't done a whole lot of this year. They've had their key moments, right? Mariota's fumble in the red zone, Brady's botched snap last week. Haven't seen an interception. No. Haven't seen those DBs have their moment yet. I think this is a good opportunity for them. I also think for a young Panthers defense and some young corners. Remember J.C. Horn, who's uber talented, a guy that both of us wanted in New Orleans. Still a young guy going up against a guy like Mike Thomas, Juice Landry, a really talented Chris Olave. It's going to be a really good opportunity for the Saints to get some chemistry things right and get some things right. I'm not saying it's a walk in the park type of a game, especially against a divisional opponent. It never is. But on paper, there's a lot of opportunities for this team to get it right.
Yeah, there is. And let's start with Baker Mayfield. Baker, just like Jameis, throughout his career, has had a propensity to throw the ball to the other team while he's trying to do too much. He's an extremely mobile quarterback that throws well on the run. So do not be surprised, ladies and gentlemen, if the Panthers use a lot of half pockets with him, or half rollouts with him, moving pockets with him, that sort of thing. It's up to the Saints defensive ends to crush those plays quickly. Davenport and Cam, you played well against the run so far. Same with Granderson. Those guys are going to have to come alive real quick as pass rushers. And I wrote an article about that very thing early, just a couple hours ago. I think this morning. Anyway, it was today.
A couple hours ago. Same thing.
Yeah, right. And it is up to this defensive line. Again, we're not talking sacks, as nice as they would be. But Baker Mayfield's a guy that, if you can get too early on, you can rattle him a little bit. You can force him to rush his throws. He will throw the ball to the other team. We do have, I hope, the start of good news this week. And that, according to John Hendricks, both Alvin Kamara with that rib injury and Paulson Adebo with his ankle injury, were back at practice on a limited basis today. So their statuses are something to watch as we progress through the week. But this Saints secondary, like you said, Brendan, it has the talent in place to make plays even with Adebo sidelined. Bradley Roby has gotten off to a shaky start, but we know what he's capable of. Marshawn Latimore is probably going to be going up against DJ Moore, one of the better and most underrated wideouts in the NFL. Tyrann Mathieu, Marcus May, Justin Evans, they've all had their moments at safety. And we're starting to see that communication come together a little bit. The one thing that did concern me about this secondary, it terrified me going into that game against Brady. And I thought the safeties played pretty well, mainly because we didn't see the back of their jerseys on the television screen after a big play down the field. That's a mark that your safeties are playing pretty well when you go up against a seasoned veteran passer. And the fact that we did not see that, bodes well for this New Orleans secondary as they continue to improve. I do think it's going to be another defensive struggle because the Panthers defensively are a very physical bunch. Folks, this is one of the finest young defenses in the NFL. You'll never hear about them because the team in general is so bad, but they can get after the passer. They could stuff the run. They have active, versatile linebackers. And like you said, not only with J.C. Horn, but also C.J. Henderson and Dante Jackson, they have a trio of outstanding young cornerbacks that are going to be a test for those New Orleans wideouts. So, for New Orleans, it's going to be the same old story that we were talking about coming into the last week against Tampa Bay. They're going to need to run the ball first. Because as talented as physical as the Panthers are up front, they were susceptible to inside runs most of 2021, and from what little I've seen so far, I've only started watching film on their defense. In 2022, they're susceptible, vulnerable to the same kind of thing. So, in order to, you can make young cornerbacks make mistakes with play action freezes, double moves, things like that. That is all the more effective if you can A, run the ball, and B, provide enough pass protection for a longer developing route, pass pattern to take effect. So again, it starts up front. I think the Saints will be okay run blocking, but they're gonna have to hold up against Brian Burns and that inside pass rush of Carolina. To give an opportunity for the Saints receivers to make plays in the Carolina secondary.
You named a lot of guys on that Carolina team that are very underrated, not just on their team, not just in the NFC South, but the league in general. People forget Dante Jackson. What a corner, right? He had a fantastic rookie year. CJ Henderson surprised to be traded to the Panthers when he did after coming off of a good year. J.C. Horn, really his first year in the NFL this year. You mentioned Brian Burns. I'll throw Shaq Thompson out there. He's a really underrated linebacker for the Panthers. There's a lot of guys
Jeremy
on that.
Chin, Xavier Woods at safety are a couple of playmakers. This is a good defense.
Really young, and they have their moments where they show how young they are. But for the most part, they're young, they're athletic. And honestly, with how athletic they are, top to bottom, Alvin Kamara is not going to have as many mismatches as maybe you want him to if he goes in that game. So let's go ahead, Bob. You kind of mentioned it a little bit before, but I'll run down the injury report before we go into our last 10 minutes here. Every single player was in attendance for the Saints today at practice. And all 11 on the injury report were listed as limited. The list goes like this: Jameis Winston, Paulson Debo, Alvin Kamara, Ryan Ramczyk, Traquan Smith, Taysom Hill, Marcus May, Deontay Hardy, and Adam Prentice. So even the fullback on the injury report. But everybody's limited, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, especially on a Wednesday. To have all those guys limited is showing progress towards playing in week 3. And it's a little weird, too, this year with not having a probable, right? It's just questionable. So you might see those guys listed as questionable, but I think even John mentioned it a couple weeks ago. There's a lot of guys that are going to be listed as questionable that if probable was still a thing, they'd be probable.
Yeah.
Let's jump to some questions before we continue. Is there any word on Murray playing this week? It's going to be interesting. With Kamara being healthy, I don't see it. I think if anything, it's an emergency. And we kind of talked about this last week too. I would not be surprised at all if they end up releasing Murray off the practice squad and just being a guy that comes back to the practice squad if there's an injury. What was his name? Like a little different, but I could see him being like an Andy Tanner type of a guy or a James Barrett type of guy that just continuously comes back to the practice squad if there's a need. What do we think of Dwayne Washington Jr.? I've said this before. I think he's an okay running back, but I think he makes his money, makes his bread and butter because he's a really good special teams player. And,
Dwayne Washington is on this team because of special teams and special teams alone. And as far as Latavius Murray, it did surprise me because I got to believe the Saints had a pretty good idea by Thursday or Friday that Kamara wasn't going to play against Tampa Bay. So it did surprise me that they didn't activate Murray. But based off what we said, we know what kind of fit Mark Ingram is in this offense. I thought Tony Jones handled himself extremely well in the limited touches that he got. As long as that continues, even if Alvin Kamara is going to be on a limited snap count, I don't really see Latavius Murray being activated yet. If something happens, if they lose confidence in either Ingram, and I know about the fumbles, but this team still has confidence in Mark Ingram, and they should. As long as they still have confidence in Ingram and Tony Jones, like you said, Brendan, there's not really room for Latavius Murray on this roster.
Right. Well, we got about 5 minutes left, Bob. 5 to 7 minutes, somewhere in there. Let's talk about some guys. I mean, you did a great job highlighting some guys on defense. You talked about DJ Moore, but some guys on this Carolina team to watch for, some guys that could provide some mismatches and nightmares for the Saints offensively or defensively.
Well, if you're going up against Carolina, the conversation, as long as he's healthy, the conversation starts with Christian McCaffrey. And as much as Carolina did to bolster the backup running back position, we saw Chuba Howard have a solid rookie year. We saw them sign that bruising running back, Dante Freeman. McCaffrey is still shouldering the entire load of this offense. He isn't, and I know people will disagree with me, but he isn't the dynamic, versatile threat that Alvin Kamara is, but he still hurts defenses in so many ways. DJ Moore is dangerous and, frankly, one of my favorite receivers in the NFL, but this offense lives and dies with what Christian McCaffrey can do to them. So expect Marcus May has been playing inside in the tackle box a lot so far this season. It seems like that's the role that the Saints want to use for him, while they use Tyrann Mathieu more as a traditional safety and in a single high and two deep coverage role. And really, you could reverse those two players too, but that's just what I've seen so far. Marcus May, Demario Davis, and Pete Werner are going to have their hands full with Christian McCaffrey coming out of the backfield as a receiver, because we know he does that pretty well. And the Saints, it's of utmost importance that the Saints shut down those off-tackle runs that McCaffrey is so good at. He's not a great inside runner. He's capable. He beats you off tackle, where he can read that initial hole and take it, either bounce it further outside or take a sharp cut inside. In that way, again, he's a similar back to Alvin Kamara. Alvin's just a little bit more dynamic, but McCaffrey has terrific vision. So Demario, Pete, and Marcus May, they're going to be challenged all over the field and from sideline to sideline, both physically and intellectually. They're going to have to read where those Carolina, where that Carolina blocking are opening up the secondary, the cutback lanes for Christian McCaffrey. It's great to get push and stalemate at the point of attack, but if you leave a cutback lane open, you're still vulnerable in the running game, and that's where Demario, Pete Werner, and Marcus May are going to come up huge on this Sunday's matchup.
Offensively for Carolina, I'm going to pick a guy that maybe not a lot of people would. But we talked so much about communication in the secondary this offseason, and it's held up really well, but it's got to continue to hold up when you got a player like Robbie Anderson on the other side that will just eat you up with the deep ball. I'm looking at a guy like Robbie Anderson. Now, Robbie I.E. or Robbie Y. He just switched it from one to the other. But nonetheless, Robbie Anderson, he had that 1 year with the New York Jets, and he was linked to New Orleans that offseason along with Emmanuel Sanders. And man, was I hoping the Saints would get a guy like Robbie Anderson. He ends up going with Carolina, but he's a deep ball magician. He'll beat guys one-on-one. He has blazing speed. He's going to be Baker Mayfield's best friend if Baker gets time, not just against the Saints, but all year long, because they're going to connect on some home run hitters. He is the definition of boomer bust type of wide receiver in fantasy football. But Robbie Anderson could pose lots of threats to New Orleans. I think, especially if Paulson Adebo plays this week, the Saints are going to be really good in the secondary, but that communication's got to continue to hold up, because you got Robbie on one side, you got DJ Moore on the other. Both those guys can burn you for big plays, and I think Baker Mayfield has an underrated deep ball. So that's where I'm going offensively. Defensively, we named essentially the whole defense, Bob. So if you had to go with one guy, who are you looking at defensively that could cause some problems against New Orleans? Brian
Burns, there's no doubt about it. Brian Burns is one of the few edge rushers that's given Ryan Ramczyk fits in his career. And Burns has some, and he'll line up on both sides. Burns has some really nice career numbers against the Saints. Frankie Lavu, they're one of the Panthers linebackers, and Shaq Thompson, they'll be used on those inside blitzes that we just got done pulling our hair out about. That could present some problems for the New Orleans line, again, if they can't handle it. but if there's a single player on the Panthers defense that could wreck the Saints offensive line or offensive game plan, it's Brian Burns. You need to contain him. He's going to come off of the edge most of the time, but even at his size, he runs about 255. He's strong enough to play inside or hurt the Saints guards on those inside rushes. And we've seen, we've talked about the blitzers or extra rushers. We've seen the Saints interior line get just as befuddled, when an edge rusher runs an inside stunt and a team brings an edge blitz. Because the guards do what they're supposed, or the tackles do what they're supposed to do. They react to the blitz. But meanwhile, and Cesar Ruiz especially, I've seen Ruiz literally drop his hands to his side and just stand there, like the Tom Benson statue outside of the Caesars Superdome. Brian Burns is a player that should terrify you if you're a Saint fan.
I'm going to go with another guy in that defense that I like a lot. I'm going to go with Jeremy Chin, and that's just because of how versatile he is at the safety spot, because whether he's going to be able to come up and be a delayed blitzer that has given New Orleans fits this year, certainly could fit that profile. Could certainly fit a profile of a guy that's going to shadow a guy like Alvin Kamara throughout the game if he has to. And he's a big hitter. That's one thing. When you come across the middle, a guy like Landry, Olave, not so worried about Mike Thomas. He's a big dude. But those little guys coming across the middle, I mean, Jeremy Chin is a big hitter. He's a playmaker. That's the one thing that made him so special for the Panthers over the years. He makes big plays at big times, interceptions, fumble returns. Didn't he have 2 returns for touchdowns in a single game his rookie year? I mean, he's that type of player. And that's what terrifies a lot of the NFC South, and that's why some Saints fans should definitely be looking towards 21 in the blue and black for week number 3. Well, Bob, we have a lot more to talk about when it comes to the Panthers, but we're going to save that for Sunday. So in the meantime, guys, it has been great, at least for me, to be back doing this from my own home. I certainly appreciate this backdrop opposed to some random hotel. And, as Bob says, the Brendan Boylan World Tour. I don't even know where I am half the time. With that being said, Bobo, where can the world follow you and your world tour on the World Wide Web?
Well, and it's funny. I think of our 10 Bayou Blitz shows, I think we've only done maybe 2, maybe 3 where we were both at home. You might prefer your backdrop of home. I prefer the backdrop I had on our second or third show, with the beach behind me, or where I was this past week with the city of New Orleans behind me. Speaking of New Orleans, I do want to apologize. It was great to catch up and meet for the first time a couple of friends that I have forged while doing this. But I feel bad, and I am so sorry that I missed a great many of you. I will be back down there, and I promise I'll do a better job of coordinating this time. I didn't realize I would have absolutely no service once I got inside the Superdome. That's never happened to me before. So next time I'll pass out my phone numbers, or we'll coordinate a meeting place beforehand or after the fact. I loved the time that I spent with the few of you that I did see. Thank you so much for making the time to come out and see me, either at the hotel or out at a restaurant. I really appreciated it. It made a fun time down there even more fun. And like I said, I will be down there again. But in the meantime, until then, or unless any of you are coming up to Pittsburgh for the Saints Steelers game or otherwise, you can follow me, Bob Rose, on Facebook, or at Bobby R 2613 on Twitter. All of my work, Brendan's work, Kyle Mosley's work, John Hendricks's work, all of us could be found at the Saints News Network, Saints News Network on Facebook, or at Saints News on Twitter. And as always, guys, you guys are the ones that make this Bayou Blitz show, make this Bayou Blitz Facebook group, make this at Bayou Blitz Pod Twitter page. You're the ones that are causing this to grow. You're the one that are giving us some muscle. So Brendan and I love you for it. And really appreciate it. If you don't mind, keep our keep this steam engine rolling. Pass out the word to friends, family members, other fans. Whatever you got to do. As we say every single week, this is your group. You caused it to grow. We're just your mouthpieces. This is your family, so make it grow. Thank you.
And you got a lot of people saying they're going to hit you up in Pittsburgh.
I hope they do.
I have to make another trip up to Pittsburgh. For myself, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram at BT Boylan. Same guys. I'm really appreciative of all you guys, what you guys have done and welcomed me into the Bayou Blitz family this season. The Saints are in Charlotte this weekend. So if any of you guys are making the trip up, please give me a ring. I will be picking up John Hendricks from the airport, I believe. So I will be in town. I'm only about 20 minutes from the city anyway. Would love to get a chance to meet some of you guys if you're in town. Please hit me up on Twitter. That's probably the best place to message me. Just shoot me a message and we'll try to coordinate a time. If you guys are coming up and I don't see you, recommendations for places, please. And I love both these places. I'm not lying to anybody. I have paintings of these places in my home. Like the outside of these places, they're icons and staples of the Charlotte community. Go to Cabo Fish Taco. John Hendricks will vouch for me as well. We went there the first time he came to Charlotte. Fantastic little spot. And go to Amelie's French Bakery. They just opened a new location. It is fantastic. And again, John will vouch for me. We went there last year and he made me feel silly because I couldn't pronounce anything on the menu, and him being in New Orleans, he knew exactly how to say everything. So definitely hit those places up if you're around. Like I said, hit me up if you are going to be in town. We're so thankful for you guys. I do want one last little rant because it's our podcast. We can do whatever we want. As some of you know, I did a basketball documentary almost 2 years ago now, and it was a fantastic experience. A lot of joy to a lot of people. And HBO is going to be releasing a documentary that is really close to me in early October on Jeremy Lin and Linsanity in the 2 weeks in New York from a perspective of a ton of Asian American people. For the people that don't know, Linsanity was his big run for undrafted free agent Jeremy Lin in 2012. It went nationwide, it went worldwide, and it affected Asian Americans in such a positive light all over the world. So if you guys have a little bit of time and your HBO subscribers, please check it out. I know a lot of people worked really hard on that documentary, and I know from working on my own documentary, there's a lot of hours that go into it, but it's a great opportunity to educate yourselves about some things, and it's a really good opportunity to sit there and enjoy a really fun moment in sports history. So please go check that out. Look, I got Linsanity fans over here. How about that? Yeah, I've met Jeremy a couple times. He's a great guy. He definitely deserves the recognition. But for us in the Bayou Blitz, Bob Rose and I will be back on Sunday morning with the pregame show. I might have to drive out to the city and do the pregame show from the city. It's only fitting, right? We'll see what I can make happen. But until then, I never get this right. That's Bob Rose. I'm Brendan Boylan. We thank you so much for hanging out with us on the Bayou Blitz podcast, episode number 10. I can't believe we've already done this for 2.5 months. But until we see you guys on Sunday, remember to find your peace, spread love, practice positivity, and we'll see you guys on Sunday.